Welcome to this episode of Cultural Futurism. Today I'm speaking with Zack Kampf, a doctoral candidate in depth psychology with a specialty in Jungian psychology. Zack, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So today I do want to talk about, this channel in part is trying to discuss futurism and modern technology and kind of where we're going in the context of trying to incorporate the social sciences into the discussion, because a lot of times technology conversations or futurism conversations, they're very often just like technical or political or just pure sci-fi movies. So bringing in a little bit of like a social psychology perspective, I think is missing from the conversation, which makes you kind of like the perfect candidate here, in that like you're studying something that is just like so juicy in terms of like the social sciences. It's like the juicy part, the thing that like people are scared to talk about, that like the dream elements and the stuff like this. I know that like Jordan Peterson is quoted as saying that he was told never to talk about like Jung throughout like his after college. Maybe that's actually my first question: is why do you think that Jung, recently or these days, is kind of something that's maybe like don't talk about that, or taboo? And is that even the case?
It seems like he's coming back into the conversation a little more than what I recall, anyway, from like when I went to grad school and stuff before doing this specific Jungian program. But yeah, I think like traditionally he's sort of pushed the edges of the like materialist hard science paradigm.
Right.
And so that's why I think a lot of like psychology as a field has always had this complex about like wanting to be taken seriously next to like physics and chemistry and hard sciences. And so you get like the behavioral psychology and stuff that's really more easily measurable. And anybody studying the unconscious, and Jung in particular, who gets into like, God and the God image and a lot of stuff that people don't want to talk about, like that. It's like people see it as a taint on the on psychology being a reputable science.
So do you think that psychology should try to be a hard science? Because for fairly clear reasons, it just like is not physics, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that it should try to be more like physics or less like it, or what do you think?
I think it's probably inevitable that it tries to go both ways. But really, the hard problem of consciousness. Sorry, my talk's going crazy. The hard problem of consciousness is the thing that's gonna, I think, make us kind of do a phase transition into the next scientific paradigm, and psychology is just in there,
Right.
So it's by nature of what it's trying to study, it's not easily quantifiable. How do you set up a repeatable experience for an internal state? It's
right.
So
yeah,
no, I don't think it should
like...
try to be. I don't think it should try to be a hard science. I think it has to be in communication with the hard science, pushing towards some synthesis.
Yeah, so like when I think about Jung and what he does and stands for, he kind of like humanizes the idea of being human. In terms of like the brain is not just neural connections. It is like it creates this thing called consciousness, and that is so just it's such not a thing that you can describe in terms of just physics and biology. It's something else. It is like stories, and it's things like gods. And as much as I do like lean very heavily to wanting to make everything just as hard sciencey as possible, what do you do with like the dreams that inform who you are as a human being, and they happen to be about like some God image or something like this? Like what do you do with that if you're only sticking to the hard sciences? which is why I think that we always probably will have some place in the conversation for Jung. Um, what does he do specifically right now, do you think, for your average person who's like seeking mental health? Is there like a tangible thing that he does? I mean, is it like having some respect for dreams, or or what do you, or putting the language to people's relationships that wouldn't otherwise be there, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think his theories are really trying to map out the unknown and trying to find in meaning in. I mean, he studied um, people with psychotic disorders, whereas like Freud mainly worked with people with neurotic disorders. So I mean, he was like looking for meaning in like what we deem totally crazy, and found meaning in that. And I think the way society is now, I mean, things are crazy, and so
Hmm.
I think that's the resurgence in people's attraction to Jung, is it tries to find meaning in the craziness,
So
or it gives
one
a
just
way
like
of finding meaning in the craziness.
right, and one maybe like maybe there are 2 points of criticism for Jung, and I'll throw them out there. I'm curious your response. Um, the first is that it's so academic, it's almost impenetrable. And
Yeah.
at the same time, in terms of it's fun to read, but it's kind of like unrelatable in a from someone who just like doesn't study this. That's one point of criticism, and kind of related to that is because it seems a little impenetrable, it 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 could all be utter nonsense from it could be Deepak Chopra, you know, uh, to someone who's casually reading this. What are your thoughts to those two critiques?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I would have picked up like one of Jung's books on alchemy or something like that, having not read any post-Jungian like overviews of his concepts and everything, I would have just been like, this is doesn't make any sense. Why is he referencing these debunked myths, and why is he so concerned with all that stuff? And I mean, he had a classical education, um, so he's reading the Greek and the Latin, and none of us are really educated. We don't come with that foundation, so it's hard to interpret unless you're familiar with some of that stuff.
How is he? I mean, in terms of like meaning, because that is kind of like the central. Is it true that like meaning is like the main thing that he's trying to inject into the psychology conversation? Finding meaning, is that kind of what it boils down to? Is that fair to say, or?
That's one of the biggest things I take away from studying his work. Um, and I mean, the context in which he was writing and theorizing, was like in response to Nietzsche and God is dead, and
Right.
a sort of nihilism taking over the world. So I think he was trying to defend an existing meaning more so than create one.
So I mean, like right now we're in an interesting space where, in a sense, it's been a long time since I've read Nietzsche too, but in a sense, like Nietzsche is winning. That like God is like slowly dying from the culture, and
Mm-hmm.
it's being replaced by, people say social justice movements, maybe also like technology is creeping in there. That I mean, there are straight up churches now where they worship, or not worship, but like sing hymns to Isaac Newton. And there is or was a church in San Francisco that preemptively said that there will very soon be an AI God, and we are going to be the ones who praise this AI God. What on earth would Jung say about that? Is there
Oh man.
true meaning to be found in that, or would he say that that's just silly and vapid?
I think I can't say what he would say, but my best guess. Um, he wrote a lot on the religious instinct, and so I think there is an instinct to like having a God image is inescapable. So even if you reject God images that have been handed down through the traditional world religions, something else will fill that void, you know. And he wrote a lot on technology, not specifically in that context as like a God image, but sort of the inflationary thing, like the inflation of the rational mind, thinking that we can sort of innovate our way out of any problem.
Where did you come down on that? Did you think that we can, or is that like a vain thing?
No, he was really critical of like, the deification of reason. There's other forces in the psyche that, if you sort of monotheistically praise just reason as the savior of, which I think the technological thing, like praising AI, that's sort of a branching off of that. But that represses all the other forces in the psyche, and that becomes problematic. So he was pretty condemning of that in modern society, and he was pretty worried about where that would lead.
Are you worried about where technology, and let's just say the straight up worship of technology, are you worried about where that's going to lead as someone who works in the mental health field?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the reasons, like, even though he's sort of been chastised in the more mainstream academia, like his predictions are just, especially now in the last like 2 years, they're just like palpably real. You're like, damn, this guy was ahead of his time.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where we are still just going to have to like see what happens with technology. But I mean, the most obvious prediction ever is that it's not going to slow down and it's not going to stop. We're going to keep getting technological innovation, and it is starting to become more and more personal because, as people, Elon Musk and people talk about, we already are cyborgs. And,
right.
I have my phone right beside me as I'm sitting here on my laptop, right? I mean, technology is just like absolutely all over my life. And I feel like it's not even, I'm not even like a bad case of this, right?
Right.
And as we do become more and more cyborg-esque, I think that it's inevitable that we might have to have a new way of talking about our humanity. And do you think that, I mean, and it is interesting that like the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, I'm not too sure how you feel about him, but like whenever, like when he talks, it does totally resonate with some part of myself. And it's I'm a very modern person, and he's harkening back to like pretty old ideas, talking about like stories from the Bible and these very ancient things. And I grew up religious. Now I'm an atheist, but for some reason, like that ancient way of framing what's happening in modern times, it still like weirdly works and just resonates. And do you think that that's going to continue being the case as we just like cyborgify ourselves? Or what do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I mean the extent to which we're integrating technology into our life, and we have access to all this information at any given time through our phone and everything. Like it can store more than our memories, well, theoretically. But in a lot of ways, that's sort of just extending the conscious mind, and I don't know that really changes the nature of the unconscious in any fundamental way.
Okay, I want to get to the unconscious in a second, but I have a question. I'm curious about this. This is slightly less vague. So I mean, I have side gigs as like a writer. For fun, I write novels and screenplays, right? And the second you get into that world, you learn about the hero's journey automatically. You can't step foot into screenwriting until you know about the hero's journey, right? Is the hero's journey which I know is very close related to like Jungian thought and
Mm.
a lot of things like this. It gets brought up when Jung gets mentioned often. Um, will the hero's journey and tangential thinking, what is to be human, how stories are told about humanity, will they still be relevant the day that we fully become merged with machines and we give up the meat suit and we're in the Black Mirror episode where finally we just give up the meat suit and we're fully robotic. uh, will those types of stories still be relevant at all, do you think?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's like pure speculation, but
Well, let's hear your speculation.
yeah, I mean, the thing that distinguishes Jung most from any other psychologist is like his theory of archetypes and the collective unconscious. And archetypes are what they are because they're timeless. So they're sort of the best possible expression of something that's fundamentally unknowable, but also timeless. And so the way they express themselves, changes, but they're still the same. But they're also tied very closely in with the instincts, and the instincts are obviously part of the biology of being in the meat suit. So it's hard to say. I don't know. I mean, my first instinct is that archetypal patterns are timeless, and so regardless of whether consciousness is embedded only in our physicality and the way we understand it now, or if it's fundamentally different when we're hooked up to something technological, I think the patterns will probably remain timeless, and the hero's journey will probably be an ever-recurring thing.
When Jung says that these archetypes are timeless, does he mean timeless in terms of humanity? Like when there were only like let's say pre-Great Ape, were these archetypes still somehow floating around the literal material cosmos, or did it take the creation of the human mind for them to come into existence?
I think in their relation to the instincts, they predate human experience. I mean, an archetypal pattern would be like an instinctual behavioral pattern that is sort of always there in potentiality and then gets triggered by an environment. So when he's talking about archetypes, he references a bird's nesting behavior that, it just happens.
So that's really interesting because that sounds so clearly tied to the material world when you phrase it like that, which is really interesting. So I mean, like, okay, so I'm playing with this just another moment or two, but let's say that like we discover alien life forms, they also would inherently have some sort of archetypal patterns in the sense that they would definitely have like instinctual behavioral patterns, and their brains would be, if their brains were complex enough, they would also have thoughts and dreams they wouldn't know what to do with, and so they would need some sort of like this archetypal language to to have in their vernacular, let's say. Is that true? Is that how this would work?
I mean, I have no idea with alien, like a hypothetical alien
Is
being.
is it emergent? Maybe that's my question. Like when any sort of intelligence reaches a certain level, do archetypes emerge?
Yeah, I guess you would say so. I guess they are emergent. I mean, like, it's hard because you're reaching back into, into a creation myth. Like was there already an existing potential for the emergence of intelligence?
Right.
That's hard to say. His theory is yes, but whether that thing itself is emergent from something deeper, like how far down do you want to go? You get into pure myth at the bottom of it.
Right.
You get into creation myth and how do these things come about from what's ultimately unknowable.
So the unknowable thing there, I mean, this is again why I enjoy like thinking about Jung and just the way he articulates, you know, everything
Yeah.
is that he is willing to grapple with, you know, absolutely the unknown,
Mhm.
and the unknown to him is still the unknown to us in terms of the mind, which is the idea of the unconscious, right? Um, I wrote this article, and this is something that we've talked about before online, is this question of will Neuralink change the way we think about the unconscious? And I wrote about this as kind of like, you know, I just had fun with it. It was just kind of a, I didn't know how serious to take it, so I took it a little bit of in a cartoon sense.
Yeah.
But it's like an honest question, and I've gotten like almost virtually no response from anybody who's read this piece, and but I think it's like it's a serious question. Is like if you can, you know, if we're sticking wires into our brains now, and if this can, you know, allow you to have telepathy and so many things, it can also, I'm sure, manipulate your dreams in some sense, or your dreams could, here's a thought that I think is I threw in the piece is that could you dream something that would have an impact in the real world? Like this dream pattern makes it so that your toaster starts up in the morning, or something as mundane as that, to you know, absolutely whatever your dream thoughts write the novel or for you or whatever. That is kind of, it's insane to think about, but that's kind of real. That's kind of happening. Um, what are your thoughts on that specific question of how will Neuralink, um, I mean, change how we think about the unconscious?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's indisputable that Neuralink will change our consciousness. How it might change our unconscious is fascinating to think about. I mean, um, the definition of the unconscious is negative. It is what exists like outside of the domains of consciousness. So Neuralink could potentially, you know, just profoundly expand what we can be conscious of at a given time. So in some sense, it seems like that would make the space of the unconscious smaller.
Oh, that's
You
interesting.
know, but like Jung had a compensatory model of the psyche, so it's self-correcting, and you know, if it becomes one-sided, you know, like if you get hyper-focused on something in your conscious mind, it constellates an opposing position in the unconscious that plays out, you know, in your behaviors or slips of the tongue or the classic kind of Freudian things. But it's like the unconscious has an attitude that opposes or compensates for the conscious attitude, and so it, you know, either side can change and react to the other. So if you something as significant as Neuralink potentially changing how much we can hold in our consciousness, I don't know exactly in what way that would affect the unconscious, but it's got to have a profound effect.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there is so much to explore here, even though a lot of it is just kind of speculation. But you
Mm-hmm.
remember those studies, the split brain studies, where they separated the thing in the middle of the brain,
Corpus callosum.
the corpus callosum. That's
I
right.
think
So
that's it. Yeah.
they did. I think that's right too. So they did these studies where people who had that severed, they would ask the person to write down what is your favorite color, and say, you know, and speak verbally, what is your favorite color? Well, the right side of the brain is writing, I believe, and the left side of the brain is verbal. So the left side of the brain will say green, the right side of the brain in some of these studies would say blue.
Yeah.
So like this side of my brain thinks my favorite color is this, and this side of my brain has a different conception of what my favorite color is. I mean, potentially Neuralink could like make this side of the brain, the nonverbal side, become more alive in a sense. I mean,
Hmm.
potentially, if it's. I mean, I think it was Sam Harris or somebody who wrote about this in the context and described it like, so half of my brain is the nonverbal half is trapped, and it always has to go along with whatever the verbal side goes with, because the verbal side is the one that's making the decisions when you're
I
in a
don't know that
context.
I agree
I don't
with
know if I do
that.
either, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's the Jungian idea, is that the psyche is by nature has a capacity to fragment,
Mm,
and so your ego functioning is like the integrative function. So the psyche's natural state is schizophrenic. It's
mm,
subpersonalities, sort of conflicting drives and motivations and stuff, and the ego function is to kind of hold those together. So you can see that really clearly in the split brain patients. There's two distinctive personalities, and in dissociative identity disorders, you see that even more profoundly. You can have
mm,
multiple different personalities. Some of the most fascinating studies are the ones where like the different personalities actually have different physiological traits. One, they tend to be archetypal. There tends to be like a child, a sort of persecutory type personality, a sort of savior figure. It's not my specific niche, but
mhm.
there's 5 or 6 sort of archetypal personalities that are common in that, and they've done studies where one will have high blood pressure and one won't. One might have diabetes, and when you switch personalities, the physiological composition changes.
Boy, that is so interesting. Yeah, I mean, how many people still receive therapy in the Jungian Freudian sense?
Oh, very few. I mean, if you want to have like true classical Jungian analysis, you have to go to a Jungian analyst, which is like, as far as I know, no insurance company will.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So you generally have to be pretty privileged. It's going to be out of pocket, private pay, and it's going to be expensive. So there's a lot of Jungian analysts out there, but they're not accessible for much of the population. A lot of the more typical kinds of clinicians, doing cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff like that. I don't know percentages or anything, but a lot of people integrate some amount of Freudian, psychodynamic type work, which is focused on, going back into childhood wounding and how that's driving the situations you create for yourself in the present, things like that. So it's in the ballpark, but yeah, I think for the most part, from what I've seen, it's more like behaviorally oriented and
Yeah.
shallower, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it is so like it's so interesting to me, and I think that I can only speak for myself, but like I kind of again like it's super just like hard materialist, that's just how I view the world, but I'm still also like very much drawn to all of this stuff, and I think it is because of my kind of just like artistic inklings. I like to describe the world in literary fashion. I see the world as, mostly just like, a funny place, and we're playing the game. Yeah, this is how I see life, is like it's a ride, that whole sort of a thing is how I just like thinking about life. Um, and this is kind of where I'm leading this with this next conversation piece is you, I think, in your gut probably feel fairly similarly in that I think that you probably like to think about unionism and these things in an artistic context. And I have this inkling based upon the paper that you wrote, um, which is Antichrist, Superstar, Marilyn Manson, and the Planetary Archetypes. And I have not read the full thing, but I read the first few pages, and I also spent last night going back and looking at some classic Marilyn Manson music videos. And
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about how you married some Jungian thought with the Marilyn Manson phenomenon.
Yeah. So one of the common uses of Jungian theory is like film analysis, or using archetypes to look at art and culture. So I was just thinking of different figures, artistic figures or whatever, who influenced me or just struck me. And I remember being pretty struck by Marilyn Manson when he must have been at the height of his popularity when I was like, I don't know, in 6th or 7th grade or something. And so I kind of vaguely remembered him being pulled into the Columbine controversy and things like that. So I wanted to take a look at his career and his work and his impact on the culture through the lens of archetypes and astrological archetypes. And that's where that paper was born out of. So like one of the archetypal images is like the planet Pluto, and Pluto also as represented by like the Roman Hades, the god of the underworld. And so there's this sort of constellation of archetypal qualities around that idea, and they tend to be intense and taboo and dark and disturbing. And so Marilyn Manson is clearly this very Plutonic figure. But what was really interesting to me is the role that he played in the culture was almost like a savior. And so in his record, Antichrist Superstar, he holds that paradox. And so his way of taking Christian imagery and turning it upside down and playing with the hidden darkness in it, I think has played a really important role in our cultural conversation, especially around, whenever that was. I can't remember when Columbine was.
Yeah, early 2000s, I believe, right?
Yeah, but he just had a very tricksterish way of, I think he raised our awareness around certain things by being bizarre and by being dark and disturbing. I mean, obviously he was like the shock rock icon, so one of the early innovators of that. And then now I feel like it's played out.
Right. I mean, a lot of like cultural conversations nowadays, at least this is the stereotype, is that the cancel culture phenomenon is now coming from the left, people say, or not so much from the right. I mean, who knows? I think that these things are definitely a pendulum that they're always going to switch back and forth. Yeah. But last topic of conversation that I had, because I know that you've worked in this too, is drugs and the use of mental health. Sorry, my voice is kind of going. What are your thoughts on the modern state of like psychedelic drugs for mental health? And are you still working in that field?
Yeah, I'm still working in mental health. Drugs generally, I have an appreciation for, and like antidepressants and benzodiazepines and just the whole pharmacological emphasis in mental health. I think it's a good tool to have on hand, but the extent to which that's like the only kind of treatment that we provide and the only kind that we value is just so incredibly problematic to me.
Yeah.
That I am very much, I can get myself worked up about that. And then psychedelics are kind of a class of their own. And I have a very reserved optimism about their potential, and I'm happy to see them being studied again in a sort of more rigorous manner.
So I'm curious your thoughts about, if you could just like venture a little bit of a prediction. It looks like there's a possibility that if Joe Biden is elected, he and Kamala might decriminalize marijuana. And I think that like in general, our acceptance of drugs is just going to like, again, it's going to keep plowing forward. We're eventually going to be way more like Amsterdam and less like America in the 1950s as just, society just becomes less freaked out by drugs. Do you think that more legalization is going to be helpful for our culture? Or do you think that it's going to, cause unknown problems to crop up psychologically?
I mean, I think by and large, legalization will do way more good than harm. But my my concern, especially about psychedelics, is just the sort of naive approach to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have way more powerful drugs than we have wisdom on how to
I think that's
use
a great
them.
point.
You know,
Yeah,
and that applies across the board. I mean, we have antidepressants and benzos and antipsychotics that can really do incredible things, and then we only go skin deep. And, you know, somebody has a psychotic episode, and we like put them on the psychotropic for indefinitely. You know, I think that just does not do justice to the many different ways a psychotic episode can come about and potentially be resolved without psychotropic drugs. And then the same thing, like on the flip side, there's some incredibly compelling evidence, especially with MDMA in the treatment of PTSD, like totally unprecedented successful treatment of PTSD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've read some of those studies.
Yeah, in the early phases. And I think, MDMA seems like there's less potential for harm, I think, than like shrooms or acid. And I think even with shrooms and acid, it's fairly minimal, but I wouldn't just go doing it, willy-nilly. Like I hope we legalize everything and we actually educate on their proper use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I completely agree with all of that. I mean, it's fascinating to me that, I mean, I like to believe it's kind of true, because it seems to be this is more evidence is coming out about this, but like a lot of world religions were early on informed by mushrooms and just other sorts of drug use, and I wonder if like a lot of human stories to get kickstarted require some sort of a drug experience for us to like develop some archetypes. Do you think that that's maybe the case? And are we still developing new archetypes?
I don't think we're still developing new archetypes, but we're always changing the way they present. And Jung differentiated between the archetypal image and the archetype as such. So an image for that Marilyn Manson type behavioral pattern, so to speak, like that, you can see similar images in mythologies expressed in different ways. So they're always evolving and changing, but the fundamental mysterious thing that repeats itself that is behind those images is the same in his theory. But I do think that probably a significant amount of the religious experiences that people had that led to the world mythologies were induced with psychedelic. Psychedelic use. You can work yourself up in other ways into the same state. You can get into a psychedelic state without any drug. But for us in modernity, we don't take any of that seriously. So the drug is a boon to where, like, hey, you can take this thing and it will occasion with some consistency this kind of experience that we don't really have access to any other way anymore for most people.
Right. Zach, is there anywhere that, or are you writing any articles right now, or anywhere to follow you online, that sort of thing?
No, I haven't been very active online, and I haven't put my website up or anything, so nowhere to find me right now, but soon.
Well, I appreciate your Facebook rants that I see every now and then. I think that they're kind of like a call to reason, which is one of those things that we need more of. And this is my open invite for you to join the madness and chaos on Twitter, because I tried to look you up there and I couldn't find you. And I think that your call to reason would be a great message on the old Twitter world. So if you ever feel inspired to get a Twitter, I'd love to follow you.
Yeah, no, I'm in the middle of remodeling my house and a bunch of other 2020 chaos, but right before all of it broke loose, I had a podcast I wanted to start, and I've got a website like half developed that's just not published, and so hopefully in the next few years I'll be rolling out some content. And unfortunately, I feel like if you're doing anything like that, it kind of necessitates a presence on social media. So
yeah, for better or worse,
yeah,
that sadly is the case. I mean, people all the time say like Twitter drives people crazy. Like just get off it. It's like, yeah, I'd love to. I got like books to sell and like articles
yeah,
for people to
exactly.
read. So,
Yeah, it's like it's
where
there.
where am I getting my audience from?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like we invented it, we can't get rid of it, so it's it's up to us to use it to its best potential and mitigate the insanity that it spews forth.
I think that's well put. Well, Zach, it was great having you on. And when you get the website up and start putting the content out, definitely have to come back and we'll have a second discussion.
Yeah, totally. Would love to.